Welcome to the fourth session of talks on Quakers and spirituality. We have based these on the 6 testimonies of simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality and sustainability. So today we're talking about community. My name is Rosemary Treadgold and I'm standing in as the coordinator for Michael Winter, who I'm delighted is able to be with us today with Helen Ross and Arthur Wells. Communities exist with many different foci, residential, ethnic, work, sports, and now a growing one based on social media. For Quakers, our focus is support for one another in our faith journey, and in terms of joy and sorrow, sharing and caring for each other. Helen, you have been involved in many different communities. How would you see the Quaker one?
I'd see the Quaker one as a community that's based primarily on values, and in terms of what that means, I think that is our testimonies. I think looking at even the number of people gathered here today, that what drew me to Quakerism was what I see as a social worker, very core social work values, and that is about, community. That is about working together. So for me, the Quaker community is something about, as you said, Rosemary, caring and sharing for each other within our community, which is based on our values of the testimonies of simplicity, peace, integrity, equality, community and sustainability. So I think it's those values that draws us together rather than a particular creed. We don't have shared beliefs. We have atheist Quakers, we have Buddhist Quakers, we have a range of spiritualities. But what does draw us together is that desire to listen to that inner voice within and to go out into the world and make it better.
Arthur, you have been involved in other religious communities. What makes the Quaker one work?
Well, Helen just mentioned listening within. The Quaker one works, I think, because we listen to each other. The lovely thing for me about a Quaker process, a meeting for worship, as we call it, is that we just don't know what people are going to say. They often get up and say things that at first seem maybe surprising or not much to do with our own concerns, but we sit there and allow a sense that this is a unique person bringing a perspective that we may have to open to in order to see what they were getting at. And so the silence between offerings is a time of deep listening and reflection, and then waiting to see if something speaks to us.
Is there a difference for you between this spiritual community of Quakers and others?
I think the other main community that I'm involved in is as a Buddhist teacher, and the focus there is on meditation practice and how to support that and how to develop it, alongside the ethical values that tend to arise out of that, of compassion and caring for the world. The Quaker values are very much the same, but the process is, in Quakerism, is more free and open and capable of surprising us, unpredictable, and that's something I very much love. I think it goes back to the origins of Quakerism, which deliberately avoided a sense of depending on leadership. We all take responsibility equally for what happens amongst ourselves.
if we go back to the possible other definitions of community, and you have been, Michael, you've been involved in both residential communities, and you're very interested now in the emergence of what I've been calling the social media community. Would you like to comment on either?
My experience of residential communities was largely involved a time that I spent living in the Findhorn community in Scotland, which is, in quotes, a New Age community. And as such, it drew to it a very wide variety of people from different spiritual traditions, including Buddhism, Hinduism, esoteric Christianity. There was a Quaker group, a whole lot of people there. And the community existed basically to support the members there exploring spirituality for themselves and how it applied in practical life. So the community evolved from being a purely spiritual community more nowadays into an eco-village. And the emphasis there is somewhat different from the pure Quaker emphasis, because there's it seems to me there's a wider variety of things that happen. There's sacred dancing, there's chanting, there's so on and so forth, which doesn't tend to happen in Quaker meeting for worship. As far as social networking communities are concerned, my knowledge of that derives from my work in the educational field, where over the last 10, 15 years, the use of online resources and the internet has led to a profound change in educational techniques and so on and so forth. And to a large extent, the development of social networking communities which are online. Now, the classical definition of communities, if you look it up on Wikipedia, talks about a community bounded by place. Obviously, if you are in an online community of like-minded people, that's the key thing, similar interests, similar passions, who could be anywhere in the world, but bound together by that common interest. So there's a distinction between an online community which is can be geographically unbounded, and a community such as the Quaker meeting, which tends to be geographically focused, although there's an extent to the focusing. Christchurch Monthly Meeting is a Quaker community, but it extends from the north of the South Island down to the river Waimate. That's right. And so that's a big community, and we're beginning to use social media to link together those parts of our local community. That sounds crazy, but that's what we're doing. Does that clarify things a bit?
Yes, it seems to me that that's very important, because the Quaker community has, I think, always been seen as a much wider one than the individual meeting. It has been a community worldwide, and there may be differences, but what the different communities write about what's going on and what their interpretation of what the Spirit has been very important to other people.
Yes.
Would you like to comment at all?
Well, the inspiration that comes from books is a feature of that wider community you're mentioning, Rosemary, that most of us get a lot of kind of nourishment and clarification by reading. We're all bookworms to some extent, which I guess was around long before social media.
But also that's being supplemented nowadays by such things as Quaker Quest, which is an American series of YouTube videos that especially younger Quakers seem to enjoy. And there's a very wide range of those. And this whole thing about there's a Quaker worldwide community which has got sort of national or yearly meeting aspects. And there are different emphases on how Quakerism is interpreted in these different areas. Some are liberal, which means basically leaderless and unprogrammed in their worship. People just sit down around a table, and when like popcorn, when they're ready to pop, they share what we call ministry. Other ones can be more structured and have a person who acts as a sort of facilitator or pastor. But they're all part of the great Quaker church, I was going to say, the Quaker fellowship or global community.
And why did you object to your own use of the word church? You don't see the Quakers as a church? Helen, do you want to comment?
Oh, that's a very interesting thing for me. I was raised as Arthur was in the manse, the Presbyterian manse, and for me, as part of my spiritual journey, my development, I went through a process of essentially throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and that witnessing my father's experience within the Presbyterian church led me to rejecting not only the church but God. So from late teens, I went into the spiritual wilderness, which lasted until I was drawn to Quaker meeting by the need in my own life for what I saw as peace and quiet. I was going through a very difficult time in a workplace bullying situation, and so I was drawn to Quakerism, partly because my own father had been a Quaker prior to his being called to the Presbyterian Church. And the first meeting that I attended at the end of 2004 was for me very much an experience of feeling at home again. But I still struggle with the word church. I will refer to I'm going to meeting or meeting for worship, but I still have difficulty in using the word church.
And historically, there wasn't a fixed place of meeting or a designated building for meeting for Christians for 300 years from when it started. It was a process of meeting in people's homes, house meetings, and in some ways that's still one of the strongest aspects of our own meeting.
So you're saying that the focus was on the people and their connections as the community.
Exactly.
Not the place.
And when the Quakers began, they used a rather derogatory word for churches. They called them steeple houses. And their own places were meeting houses and not regarded as sacred places in any sense. They were just places to gather.
For me, the church idea is not so much to do with the buildings, it's to do with the structure and the hierarchy. And for me, a church is a hierarchical organisation with a pope or an archbishop at the top and then serried ranks of underlings until you come down to the plebs in the gutter. And I do not subscribe to that as a model, and so therefore it's inappropriate for me to refer to Quakerism as a church. Spiritual community, religious, I don't like the word either, because that's, there's all this stuff. I find difficulty with the word Christian as well. I think it's beyond, it's beyond all that.
On a slightly different note, I remember going to an international meeting of Quakers in Auckland many years ago, and the people who were looking after the institutional buildings were very surprised to see that Quakers didn't wear bonnets and had special clothes. I wonder, do you think Quakers are now recognised?
Ah. Done.
Sorry, I've landed you. I've landed you.
Great question, Rosemary.
Yeah. Or even want to be in the community other than...
Well, we did think of outreach, of dressing up in Quaker gear with the hat and handing out oats and things at Rickerton Mall. But I think Quakers are often unrecognisable externally, but probably when you get to talk to people, there's a sort of resonance in the way of thinking and respect for each other, which is not exclusive to Quakers, but you know when people are potential Quakers and even actual Quakers, but there's that sort of beingness. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Well, it does a lot. I've had the experience of going to an airport to meet a Quaker who I'd never met, and I spotted her right away, and I don't know what it was. I mean, there's a sense in which Quakers dress down for meeting instead of dressing up for church. There's a sense of kind of modesty and simplicity, which stands out, sort of stands out.
The thing that I notice, the thing that I think defines Quakerism is sensible shoes.
Oh.
That is the thing that strikes me when I sit in meeting for worship and I look round at what people are wearing, and I think it's sensible shoes. And I think that is to do with that we are a faith community that has a balance, a dual focus on both faith and practice. And I think to be practical, one needs to wear practical, i.e. sensible shoes. So to me, that when I'm looking at Quakers, I think that's often the thing that I notice about them. They are both spiritual and practical. In my own terms, I have this sort of business card that talks about Fae and Kenny, which to me is that incorporation, the integration of the mystical, that belief in something bigger than ourselves, combined with and integrally connected with the doing, the practical.
We don't see many Lamborghinis parked outside the meeting house.
Yeah. It's like the shoes.
I think we also, I don't know whether this is, I think it's important that we also note that we welcome people into the community or into meeting for worship to see what it's like.
Yeah.
And there is no expectation. It is in silence. That is part of the community worship. But we are very pleased when people come along just to explore whether it fits for them, and we accept that it may not fit for everybody.
Historically, a lot of Quakers were birthright Quakers. That is, Quakers that became Quakers because their parents were, and over time this has diminished more, and people now choose to join the Quaker community. So what's the word for non-birthright?
Convinced.
Convinced, yes. So we say that they're convinced.
Quakers.
They're one of the problems with any religion, whatever, is that the language tends to be pretty archaic. I mean, we talk about ministry, when what we mean really is people getting up and spouting off in meeting for worship.
Yeah.
Would anybody like to add any more?
Well, one of the things that's come out of that attempt to create a caring community is people deliberately trying to visit anyone who's sick or going through some difficulties. This is usually a pastoral care committee that oversees that kind of connectivity within the meeting and rings people up and asks how they're doing and passes messages around and that kind of thing. And that's part of any sort of normal community process, isn't it?
And I've been on the receiving end of this recently because I've just had an accident and broken my neck, and people have been really nice. Rosemary's come and visited me. Arthur's transported me here today, and so it's really great to be part of that caring community.
Caring with a practical. So it's not just the expression of care. I mean, the expression of care includes that practical component.
And certainly the community as a whole sent you a card.
That's right.
Because their concern was for you. And they sent me one too when I had a hip revision. If you look round this table at the moment, you would see that there is a certain amount of I wouldn't like to say decrepitude.
and also, at times it involves money a little bit, like offering someone $400 or $500 for firewood for the winter, or dropping round with a parcel of food, that kind of thing.
And supporting some of our young people in their studies.
Yes.
I mean, my son James has benefited from that over the years.
And while we're talking about the young people, we're just very grateful for the amount of young Quakers involved in Generation Zero and the work that they're doing as a community.
Indeed.
On really thinking through political changes. And they were I found them very impressive that they very carefully did not belong to any political party. They were concerned with what they were concerned about.
A very cynical view would be that political parties are very much involved with self-interest, and I think that is the thing that probably differentiates us in some ways, is that we have that focus within Quakerism of the common good. And it's interesting that we have a sort of connection at one level with the Catholic worker movement because of that concern with the common good. And it's interesting that a number of people in our meeting are involved in social justice issues and in social service provision. We have a number of social workers, counsellors and educators within our midst because there is that recognition that we are social beings and that we need to recognise that in our political structures, that it's not all about in the American tradition, the pursuit of individual freedom. It is about making progress as communities and as societies.
And that, to me, having been the clerk, which is the kind of organiser at times of meetings, it's shown very clearly the difficulty of sometimes people accepting that they're there to get the sense of the meeting, not to get their view across. Well, I think we're tying things up. Is there anything anybody wants to briefly say?
I think we got to the heart of what we were looking for.
So.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Michael, Helen and Arthur. And we look forward to the next one of these investigations, if that's the word, on sustainability, which is probably tied up with why we all wear sensible shoes.